Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on this webinar held by Creative Workplaces. I'd like to start by acknowledging the many traditional owners of country throughout Australia and their elders past and present. I would also like to acknowledge our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander arts colleagues joining us today. My name is Tina Lavranos and I'm a member of the Creative Workplaces Council. I work with organisations as a consultant in the arts and cultural sector on designing healthy workplaces. I'm thrilled to be hosting this webinar today. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome and introduce our Auslan interpreters. There'll be 2 joining us today. Thank you for your great work in advance. Last month, we presented a webinar on respect at work, which featured a fascinating conversation with Creative Workplaces Chair, Kate Jenkins, and film practitioner, Rosie Lud. The Creative Australia website has a link to this webinar, as well as others we've hosted in the past. Just some background in relation to Creative Workplaces. It's established for arts workers and organisations to support and enable fair, safe and respectful workplaces to benefit the entire sector. Our goal is to support everyone working in the sector to understand their rights and obligations by providing information and resources about pay, safety and well-being. In today's webinar, we're exploring the issue of psychosocial safety in the workplace. Everyone has work health and safety responsibilities in the workplace. If you're the operator owner, you have additional responsibilities to ensure the psychological health and safety of your staff and contractors in the workplace, and to manage psychosocial hazards. Understanding this obligation and your rights as a worker to have these needs met can sometimes feel hard in creative workplaces where people are often cooperating to design and deliver work in unique and fluid ways. In my experience working with various arts and creative organisations, there's a myth or assumption of a dichotomous scale where creative freedom sits at one end and controlling conditions for safety sits at the other. And if you turn your mind to anticipating and managing risk, then somehow the conditions for creative freedom are reduced. Over time, I have come to understand that this is an assumption, and focusing on psychological safety is just as vital in the arts and culture sector as it is everywhere else. And in fact, creating these conditions enables us to have sustainable careers in the arts and also produce exciting work. Today, I'm really excited that we're joined in by SafeWork South Australia Chief Advisor Psychosocial, Jason Mavrikis. He'll provide an overview of the legal regime in this area and also share some practical guidance on what proactive tips and steps we can take to make sure we're meeting our obligations. There's also some time at the end for Jason and I to unpack some more common myths and assumptions about creative workplaces, which might block us from noticing and dealing with psychosocial risks. And then we'll allow for questions at the end. Please submit your questions using the Q&A function. I also want to point out that we understand that this topic may be distressing for some participants. So if you need support, you can access free counselling from Support Act's helpline, details of which are on their website, supportact.org.au. It's a free service for arts workers Australia-wide. So now it's my pleasure to welcome Jason.
Thank you, Tina, for that warm introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. As Tina mentioned, my name's Jason, and what I'd like to do for you over the next half an hour or so is provide an initial introduction into the world of psychosocial safety. We're going to be having a bit of a look at the laws that surround this stuff, the types of hazards that we find in this space, and then some discussion around what we might do practically, hands-on, to address these types of hazards. So bear with me for one moment, and I'll share my screen, and we'll kick off. Okay, so to begin with, I'd like to provide an overview of the framework, the safety law framework that exists in Australia. So this, is really just to set the scene and to note that I'm participating in this webinar from South Australia. We have harmonised safety laws here in South Australia. We've had them since 1 January 2013. And across the country, in the different states and territories, we have a version of these laws or state-based OHS legislation. And there's only really one jurisdiction, one state that still has that state-based OHS legislation, and that's Victoria. All of the other states and territories currently have harmonised. And when we say harmonised, what we really mean is that the intention there was to get consistency across all of the states and territories. So we had similar safety laws in effect, and that's what we have currently. So on the screen in front of you, this is a framework for the safety laws, and it shows you their relationships to each other and what each one means. So atop of this framework, this hierarchy, we have the Safety Act. Now, the Act is the safety law, and within that Act, it outlines what we call different duty holders. So different types of things in workplaces that have responsibilities and duties that they owe under the safety laws. Many of you would be familiar with the business. There's a term in the safety laws, PCBU, person conducting a business or undertaking. I don't want to go down too far into the rabbit hole of what these different terms are, but it's important just to set the scene and establish that PCBU, the business. What does the business do in a workplace? Well, it has a key responsibility under the safety laws, and that's what we call a duty of care, a primary duty of care, in fact. And in essence, the business must provide a work environment free of risks to the health and safety of workers and other persons. So that's the key legal duty and obligation in the safety laws. It's the business's duty of care. And that's expressed in a variety of different ways, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Other duty holders, other entities in workplaces that have these responsibilities under the safety laws, workers. Workers owe duties under the safety laws, and that's another key set of responsibilities. And those duties that workers owe, they overlap with the business's duty of care. And the standard that workers owe is that they must take reasonable care for their own health and safety, for the health and safety of others, through the things they do or may not do in a workplace. And they must ensure that they follow reasonable instructions and comply with reasonable policies, procedures that they're made aware of, etc. Another key class of duty holder, there's this thing called an officer of the business. That's usually somebody that is quite senior in a business, usually a senior manager or an executive level staff, and that is a class of duty holder, and they have specific duties that they owe in terms of what we call due diligence, and there's specific obligations around how they go about discharging that. Won't go too far into it, just to make the point that that is another key class of duty holder. And of course, other persons. So essentially, if you step foot on a work site in any capacity, you owe a legal duty, whether you are the courier delivery person or a worker employed at the business. Sitting beneath the Act, we have the regulations. They are a lesser form of law. The regulations, put simply, can be thought of as what to do. So the regulations address many modes of work and many industries. Some of them are very prescriptive and targeted, whereas others are quite broad and transferable and applicable to all industries. And then beneath the Act and the regs, we have approved codes of practice. So there it notes SA approved codes, but you're likely to have other approved codes in effect in your state or territory. And if they are approved in your state or territory, that gives them a kind of legal effect and evidentiary status. Australian standards. Again, some of them are also approved, but what approved codes and Australian standards do, in essence, they offer best practice guidance to duty holders on how to work safely in industry. And they can be thought of as how to do the work. So, how to perform various tasks and duties safely in the workplace. And then at the bottom of this hierarchy, we have general guidance material and information that your friendly state or territory safety regulator will publish in support of industry. And we have a range of resources freely available on our website as an example. And I've listed 4 examples of psychosocial safety related resources freely available on our website, and I'll expand on them shortly. So I've mentioned some of the duties there and the legislative framework, and this next slide talks a little bit about officers again, those senior staff members within a business. How do they discharge that due diligence obligation that they have? They can do that in a variety of different ways. They must know what the business's risk profile is. They must understand it. They must ensure that the business has sufficient resources to monitor, comply, and verify with its obligations under the safety laws. The list goes on. I won't go too far into that, but that is a very important class of duty holder in the safety laws. The business, again, I mentioned their duties. They must manage risks to the health and safety of workers and other persons. And then at the bottom there, duties of workers. And I went through what those specific duties are earlier. But the summarizing point here is to note that in a workplace, in any business, in any industry, you have these key players, these entities, these things in the workplace. We call them duty holders in terms of safety speak, but you've got the business, you've got workers, you've got officers of the business and other persons. And each of those things, they owe duties under the safety laws. And they overlap with each other. And it's important to know what they are and then what to do about them in terms of meeting the responsibilities there. Okay, so I wanted to provide a very brief case study example in a labour hire context. So as you can see on the slide before you, this outlines a bit of a scenario that may be common to many of you and that would happen, I think, commonly in the arts industry. So in this case study around labour hire, Good Catering is a catering company which provides a VIP food and drink experience for selected patrons at major sporting and music events. Good Catering usually works out of its large mobile kitchen. It has adjoining marquee tents where patrons are served food and drinks both inside and outside the tent in a fenced-off area. Good Catering has a busy festival schedule ahead and requires additional workers at a week-long festival to help with catering. Good Catering decides to engage event labour, a labour hire service that provides event labourers and staff for the festival. To meet its primary duty of care, which is what I mentioned earlier that the business owes, Good Catering and event labour must ensure that any risks to their workers' health and safety during the labour hire placement are eliminated. So that's what the safety laws call for, that risks are eliminated at their source. And if you can't do that, you then minimise as much as you are able to. So these businesses, both Good Catering and event labour, they must also share other safety duties in relation to this labour hire arrangement. So they may have shared overlapping responsibilities around any incident notification, and they must also share consultation arrangements with workers. Now, some key points to remember in this scenario. Safety duties are not transferable, okay? So if you owe a safety duty, you cannot transfer that to another, and safety duties cannot be contracted out to another party, such as a subcontractor. Now, a person can have more than one duty under the safety laws. So for example, a self-employed person may be both a business and a worker at the same time. And duties cannot be shared. So more than one person can have the same duty at the same time. Duties can be shared, I should have said there. For example, a contractor and subcontractor as PCBUs will have the same duty to ensure access to first aid facilities at a workplace. So ultimately, in this scenario, good catering owes a primary duty to the labour hire workers while they are at work in its business. When good catering contracted with event labour to supply the labour hire workers, it caused those workers to be engaged, and their work will be influenced and directed by good catering during their placement. But overlapping and running concurrently with that, event labour owes a primary duty to the labour hire workers as it has engaged them as employees and then placed them. It owes this primary duty to the workers even when they are assigned to work with good catering. So some important take-home messages there, and I'm sure many of you can relate to that scenario. Okay, so now I'd like to get into the main part of the presentation. We're going to talk about some of the key terms that are used in this space. So I just want to take a little while to unpack the meaning of some of these terms and concepts. We often use them interchangeably, and sometimes they are confused, but they have distinct meanings. So firstly, I'd like to talk about mental health and what that means. Mental health ultimately is a positive concept. We often look at it through a deficits-based lens, but it is in fact a positive concept, and it's really related to the social and emotional well-being of individuals and communities. The concept, mental health, is influenced by culture, but generally relates to the enjoyment of life, the ability to cope with stress and sadness, the fulfillment of goals and potential, and to feel a sense of connection to others. Whereas mental ill health is the inverse of that term, and it's really quite a broad term that includes both mental illness and what is commonly referred to as a mental problem. A mental illness, just to clarify, is a disorder that is diagnosed by a medical professional that may severely interfere with a person's cognitive, emotional, or social abilities. Now, psychosocial, what does that word mean? It seems to intimidate people, but it does have a pretty straightforward meaning. It's really talking about what we say interrelationships between an individual, so in this context, a worker, their thoughts, their behaviors, and their social environment. So in the context of safety, we consider the workplace and the workers' team as the primary social environments. And outside of safety, in terms of social work and psychological health, that term can also refer to a person's family of origin, their level of education, or their socioeconomic status. Whereas psychological, really, or psychology, that word is talking about the scientific study of the mind and behavior, including feelings and thoughts. In its oldest meaning, the word psychology are taken from a few Greek words, psyche meaning the spirit or the soul, and the latter half of that word, logia or logos, is referring to study or research. So taken together, it means the study of the soul. So really, again, we have these very closely related terms that are used often in this space, but they have distinct and separate meanings. So I just wanted to briefly unpack the meaning of those terms there. And here we can see the model of work-related stress. And this is where we find the definition of a psychosocial hazard. And this definition is taken from the new psychosocial laws that have been introduced across the country. So the current state of play is that in our states and territories in Australia, the majority of jurisdictions now have new psychosocial regulations in place. Prior to these laws coming into effect, the safety laws in Australia were quite silent on psychological health or psychosocial risk. So this is a big step forward and really quite progressive. So on the slide before you, this is the model of work-related stress. To the left there, the definition of what a psychosocial hazard is. So the new laws say that a psychosocial hazard is something that arises from or relates to the way that work is designed or managed, the work environment, workplace interactions and behaviors, or plant at a workplace. And we'll have a look at examples of psychosocial hazards shortly. A worker in the workplace is exposed to a psychosocial hazard that produces psychosocial risk, and it may then result in a work-related stress response happening. And that's the middle bit of this model. And that can be thought of as the mechanism of injury, so the pathway through which risk is transferred, resulting in a stress response, which may then result in harm. And a stress response happens when the demands placed upon a worker exceed their resources or their capacity to meet those demands. And if that stress response is frequent, prolonged, or severe in nature, it may then result in either psychological or physical harm. But work or stress in and of itself, work-related stress, is not a diagnosable injury. And that's really because each of us responds to stress differently. There's a broad spectrum of stress responses. And of course, some people thrive under pressure, whereas comparably others may crumble under the same degree of pressure. And there's a lot of reasons for that, individual differences, different factors that influence a person's stress response. We don't have time to go into that. But essentially, this work-related stress response can then cause a form of psychological or physical harm. So the types of harm that might result: depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. If we take burnout there as an example, the three key elements that make up burnout: cynicism, emotional exhaustion, what we call low self-efficacy, so a belief that you are no longer capable of fulfilling the requirements of your role. If you were to feel those three key elements or factors that make up burnout, perhaps it suggests that you are on the cusp of burning out. And if you observe them in a colleague that is unusually cynical or exhausted or self-doubtful, it may suggest that they are on the cusp of burning out. And if we use that one example of harm and we trace our way back to the beginning of this model and do a bit of a root cause analysis, what does that suggest to us? It suggests that in this hypothetical workplace, there are psychosocial hazards there that have created psychosocial risk that has then resulted in this work-related stress response that has been frequent, prolonged, or severe in nature, that has then resulted in this form of psychological harm. In terms of physical harm, there's a strong link in the literature and the research between heart disease and this type of hazard, these psychosocial hazards and psychosocial risk, and musculoskeletal disorders, commonly known as MSDs. And why is that the case? Just using that one example of physical harm, that's because psychosocial hazards and MSDs, they use really the same pathways, mechanisms, and hormones in the body. The body goes into that stress response. The amygdala fires up, the body's flooded with cortisol, adrenaline, the biomechanical load increases, muscle tension increases. And so you can see the overlap in the body there between psychosocial hazard, producing risk, producing that stress response, then resulting in this form of physical harm, such as musculoskeletal disorders. So this is a really useful way of understanding what we say is the interrelationships between all of these key elements in the psychosocial safety space. Okay, on the slide before you, you can see various examples of psychosocial hazards, just a brief overview of them. Some of them occur at the organizational level of a business. And what the literature, the research shows us or indicates is that where we have things like high demand, considerable workloads, no ability to affect the pace of work or the volume of work, or tight deadlines, and corresponding a lack of control, a lack of role clarity. So perhaps there are no job descriptions, or there are job descriptions, but they don't accurately reflect the way that work is being done. Poor change management. So perhaps an organizational restructure is announced. The senior managers then undertake consultation as a token gesture, as an afterthought, but it has no meaning. The workers affected by the process aren't meaningfully engaged. Inadequate reward and recognition. So no recognition of a job well done, no constructive feedback given to a worker on their performance. They are just a small portion of examples of what we consider organizational psychosocial hazards. And what the research shows is that when they are left unaddressed within a workplace, that they build cumulatively, and they actually then produce or give rise to harmful workplace behaviors, what we call event-based psychosocial hazards. And examples of that are things like harmful behaviors, work-related bullying, work-related violence and aggression, poor interpersonal communication and relationships, gendered harm such as sexual harassment. So there's a link in the literature between these different categories of psychosocial hazards. And the new psychosocial laws that I mentioned earlier, one of the things that they call for businesses to do to address these types of hazards is to give consideration to how these types of hazards may interact or combine, because we know that they rarely exist in isolation. There's usually a cluster of them, a multitude of them, compounding the effect of each other, fanning the flame of each other. So we need to give some thought to how they interact or combine with each other. And that's one of the considerations of the new laws. How do we address psychosocial hazards? Now, my work as an employee of a safety regulator is really focused in the prevention of harm space. And the way that we prevent harm is to identify these types of hazards, these psychosocial hazards. And that is the first step of risk management. And that process, risk management, is the process that we use to address these types of hazards. So if you're at all familiar with risk management, that's great. That's a useful foundation that you can build upon. If you are not, it would be timely for you to explore risk management. What does it mean? I'm going to take you through the key steps now just to give you a quick overview. Now, the first thing that we do is to identify these psychosocial hazards. Where are they in our workplace, in our work environment? What are the types of hazards that we're facing? Who's facing them? And look, instinctively, many businesses will know where these hazards are or what types of psychosocial hazards that they're facing. So you may have already identified them in the workplace. The next step is to assess the risk. And the risk is the likelihood and the consequence of these hazards producing harm to a worker. Okay, and so if you've ever done a risk assessment, as an example, you might be familiar with a risk matrix, and that's a model that you use to calculate risk. It's a very straightforward process. We then consider the hierarchy of control, and that's really thinking about what can we do practically to address these risks, to either eliminate them or to control them and minimize them. And then the fourth step is to review the control measures that you've put in place, really to determine, are they working as planned, and what, if any, changes may need to be made to them, and monitor them. And we do this process in consultation with our workers. So we talk to them, we engage with them, we involve them in the process, and they are probably your richest source of information because they are on the ground at the coalface doing the work. They know where the hazards are, and so they must, and they're directly affected by them, and so they must be involved in this process. And as you can see, at the heart of this process is management commitment, both middle management and senior management. We know that any successful safety culture is led from the top. Senior leaders set the organizational tone. There's a behavioral element that kicks in. For lack of a better phrase, or monkey see, monkey do, workers will see and look to their senior leaders for inspiration, for guidance. They will see how they talk, observe and hear how they talk about safety. They will see what are they doing about safety in practice through their actions. And that will seep down through the organizational culture, and it will potentially affect safety outcomes. We say top down, bottom up, meeting in the middle to create a culture of care and understanding and togetherness. So management commitment, a really important part of this process. And without it, any strategies that you put in place, any efforts to control these types of risks, they very well may fail. Okay, so I wanted to finish up with some tools and resources. The first one you can see there, that's a great introductory resource, Psychological Health for Small Business, freely available on our website. It has practical tips, do's and don'ts on how to control these psychosocial risks. If you've not read any of the guidance in this space yet and you want to get a quick sense of what it all means, that's a great place to start. I've listed the model code of practice there. That is the blueprint code of practice on managing psychosocial hazards. It's been freely available for several years now. Several jurisdictions have based their approved code on the model code, and it can still be used for guidance there. So you might want to check it out, freely available on SafeWork Australia, the National Safety Policy Body's website. They released 2 infographics in support of the model code when it was released. I like the second one there particularly. It's a simple one-pager with a graphic poster, and it's entitled, "What do psychosocial hazards sound like?" And it has a hypothetical worker with speech bubbles around them saying various things, indicating that they are stressed and that there are psychosocial hazards present in their workplace. I really like the way that information is presented. And then there's guidance, and this guidance has been available for several years now, addressing particular types of psychosocial hazards. So I mentioned harmful behaviors earlier, these event-based psychosocial hazards, bullying, sexual harassment. There's some excellent guidance on preventing and responding to work-related bullying for businesses, and there's an equivalent guide for workers freely available from SafeWork Australia's website. There's a guide on preventing workplace sexual harassment. There's one on preventing workplace violence and aggression, and there's an information sheet on family and domestic violence at the workplace. So some very useful resources there available to you all. All right, so I wanted to finish up with some practical tips, some takeaway messages for you all in terms of, what should we do next? Perhaps you've done nothing about psychosocial hazards. You're a business owner and you want to do the right thing. You are maybe only vaguely aware of the duties that you owe, but you really want to dip your toes into the waters of psychosocial safety. Okay, what should we do now? And if you're a worker, by the way, this tells you what the business should be doing, really. So the first one there, it's going to be difficult to achieve, and it's going to be, I think, a long process, but we're really calling for a shift in attitude, a shift in perspective there. We want workers and businesses, middle managers and senior managers to begin to consider psychosocial hazards and the risks that they produce with the same degree of importance and seriousness, just as any other safety risk. So traditionally, safety has focused on physical hazards and risks, and now we have this new focus on psychosocial hazards and risks. And the difficulty with them is that they are not always tangible; they are intangible. They're not things that can be readily observed and that you see actively in the workplace, unless they take the form of stress or harmful behaviors, etc. So they're much more difficult to manage. And there's a lot of qualitative judgment that has to come into it. But if we shift our perspective and attitude and consider them with the same degree of importance, I think that will go a long way to preventing harm of our people, our workers. Oh, I skipped ahead there. My apologies. If we've not done anything about psychosocial safety yet, we want to do an initial review of our safety system. So if you're a business owner, you're probably managing safety in some way. The way that you would do that is via what we would call a safety management system, so a structured way of managing safety. Within that safety management system, you have safety systems, safe systems of work. We want to do an initial review. Okay, what do we have in place? Where are the gaps? Bit of a gap analysis. Where can we introduce and embed psychosocial risk management into our existing systems and processes? So we might start this process with an initial gap analysis. We want to consult throughout this process. It is an actual legal duty in the safety laws. You must consult with your workers. I've seen it done very well over the years. I've seen it also done poorly. Some businesses approach it as a box ticking exercise, a token gesture, but there's so much value to consulting with your workers. Again, if they're on the ground at the coalface, they know where the hazards are, and they will contribute meaningfully to brainstorming around what can we do to address them. So they have much to offer in that space. Do consult with your workers. Maintain up-to-date knowledge. So this is just a very brief introductory presentation. There's much more to consider and to discuss, but I've also made you aware of some excellent freely available resources that you can check out after today's session. Ask questions about culture. So, we want to establish really healthy, robust safety cultures where our workers are engaged and empowered to speak up and to contribute to, the addressment of these types of hazards. And again, one key element of any successful safety culture is management commitment, both middle management and senior management commitment. And so if we don't have that within our organizational safety culture, all of the effort, all of the initiatives, they will probably fail. So if you're a senior manager, if you're a business owner, if you're a line manager, a supervisor, do give some thought to your role and how you can improve the business's safety culture. Be proactive. So this is an ongoing process. It is essentially never ending, and we need to do perhaps our first psychosocial risk assessments if we've not yet started that process. That's perhaps one of your first considerations. Officers must engage. I talked about their essential role in the workplace. Review your HR framework. So when we talk about psychosocial hazards, yes, there's a lot to consider in the safety space, but if you're in a medium to large size organization, and if you have both a safety and a HR function, you need to give some thought to how are our safety and HR people working together? Are they working in an integrated fashion? Are they sharing rich sources of data and information and evidence? Or are they working in a siloed manner? We want them to be working together collaboratively. That's really important when it comes to these types of hazards, because there's so much overlap between the functions of HR and safety people. Think outside of the box. So one suggestion there, as I mentioned, if you've not yet done your first psychosocial risk assessment on the business, it's time to consider that using all of the freely available guidance that I mentioned earlier. And when you do that, a quick consideration would be, yes, you want to get a sense of the broader business, what we say is risk profile, but we also want to consider the different risk profiles of the teams and work groups within the business, so that when we get to the point of taking action, hands-on, practically implementing control measures, that those control measures are suitable for the broader business and the teams within the business and unique needs of those teams and workers. And do not set and forget. So this stuff is an ongoing, indefinite, dynamic process. It is essentially never ending. So if you've not yet done a psychosocial risk assessment, it's time to do one soon. And then, of course, you would continue to do them on an ongoing process, ongoing time frame, depending on where you're at. And that leads us to questions. I do apologize for going slightly over time, but there is much to consider.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason, for breaking down a really complex area of law and the implications for our sector. Prior to this webinar, we've had a few conversations thinking through what might be some common assumptions that both owner-operators and staff within this sector operate under, which might prevent them from focusing on this as an area of risk to be managed. And so we've got a few questions to discuss. The first one is, a lot of creative work is performed by freelance or temporary staff. So there's no obvious hierarchy or management reporting lines, and it's tough to understand who's responsible for supporting staff, to understand risks, and who a worker might go to if they're feeling at risk. What advice do you have here?
Look, that's a great question. In the scenario I described earlier, the labour hire case study as an example, if you've been engaged by a labour hire entity and you're placed with the host employer, the principal contractor, it's likely that there are shared responsibilities there, overlapping responsibilities. So both the labour hire entity, as the entity that has directly employed you and then placed you, they have a responsibility to you. They have a duty of care to you as a worker, as do the host employer, the principal contractor. And so there should be an appropriate representative of one of those businesses that the worker can approach and address any hazards that they've identified or any issues that they're facing within the workplace. Now, I appreciate that it may not always be that clear and obvious, but in terms of what we would expect to find in any workplace is that there is a well-established, thorough induction process to the workplace. And within that induction process, it should outline the various safety systems. It may be policies and procedures. It may be accessing first aid. It may be, if you've identified a hazard, what's the process to follow? Who do you speak to? If you're exposed to harmful behaviors, if you're bullied, who do you report to? There should be a process around that, a safe system of work, etc. So they are the types of things we would expect to find in any workplace as a bare minimum. A robust induction process. into the workplace, and covering everything safety, just as an example. And of course, we and your state or territory safety regulator is there to support you. If you are in a work environment where there is no clear reporting structure and you don't know how to address an issue that you're facing, you can come to your state or territory safety regulator for advice and guidance in the first instance. And it may be that they would become involved at some point, depending on the details of the matter.
Great, thank you. The whole point of some creative work is that you're collaborating with others to produce something novel, something new. So the conditions might deliberately be pretty ambiguous, things like role clarity or task clarity. So some of the areas or categories that you mentioned around the design and management of work processes might be really vague in order to allow for creative play to occur. So how can you manage psychosocial risks in this context?
Look, in the creative space, as you've just astutely pointed out, it is a considerable challenge. I think you can strike a balance, though, between allowing for the creative process to unfold naturally and organically, but also considering the key responsibilities that I outlined earlier in the safety laws. And I realize that it's not a particularly attractive thing to take into account, and you don't want it to stymie the creative process. But essentially, put very simply, what you need to do is to, if you're, perhaps designing a performance art, putting together an act, etc., very simply, all that you need to do is to consider what could potentially go wrong. Could one of our people be harmed in some way? And then what can we do to either stop that from happening or to reduce the likelihood that it will happen? And I think that there is a middle ground, a balance can be struck within that, where you bring the people involved together very simply, and you say, look, we want this to be a success, but we also don't want to harm any of our people. And just sitting down, brainstorming, this is the process, document it, and then what could potentially go wrong, what can we do again to stop that from happening. And I think if the initial challenge is even starting that conversation around safety, again, it's not a particularly attractive proposition, but you would just need to present it in such a way to your people to say that, look, we really value your health and safety. We want to protect you from any potential harm. And the way that we can do that is just to sit down and discuss the process and come together to think about, how we can stop any potential harm from happening. So a great challenge, I acknowledge that, but I think it can be done in consultation with your people. That's the essential element, talking to them, engaging them in the process, empowering them to contribute.
Yeah. I just want to build on that. I really strongly believe you can have good risk management practices and allow for spontaneous and creative work to occur. I think a lot of organizations or work groups, be they small or large, sometimes feel overwhelmed when they're thinking about risk management. And they feel overwhelmed because they bundle all the categories of risks together. So in my experience of working with organizations, really spending time at the outset to sort of unpick and clearly define the different categories of risk that this creative initiative might incorporate. So there might be financial risk, there might be operational risk, there might be reputational risk, there is physical and psychological and psychosocial risk, and then there might be creative risk. And I think organizations think that if you take a zero tolerance approach to psychosocial or physical risk, then the creative risk has to be reduced. But you can be really brave in relation to creative risk and have the ambition of being provocative or provoking your audience to have a new thought or belief, as well as having a zero tolerance harm approach. You just have to be conscious of how taking creative risk might impact the staff or workers. And it's a really interesting conversation. So I know you're referencing safety as something that's, not attractive or uncool, but I think it can be part and parcel of the creative process. So saying like we're not sure about what we're going to produce, or we're unclear about our roles here, but how is that impacting us, and what can we do to support each other to work our way through it? So I think it can be a space which opens up learning and opens up more creativity. Another question. Some creatives, both workers and employers, think creativity involves putting yourself on the line at great personal cost. You know, there's the old adage, the show must go on. And it's more than just a job for a lot of people in the creative and arts sector. It's a passion. So this means that they might endure conditions that are unsafe. What should they remind themselves of?
Well, I don't think that artists and creatives have to put themselves in harm's way to ensure that they deliver the goods, so to speak. Again, I think a balance can be struck. It's a long working life, and if you are seriously injured or harmed in a workplace, that may prevent you from going on to create and to perform and to contribute to the arts community. And look, by putting yourself in harm's way, another lens through which to look at it, you may also be putting others at risk, whether that be your co-performers or audience participants, etc. And of course, nobody wants that. But the point there is, again, to take it back to my earlier slides around those shared and overlapping responsibilities that workers, performers, as the duties that they owe. They have to take reasonable care. That's the standard that they owe. And they have to ensure that they don't put themselves or others at risk. And they do that through either the things they do, their acts, or their omissions, the things that they don't do. We've seen across the country, since these new safety laws have come into effect, safety regulators now, they not only will investigate breaches of the safety laws, look at the business and its duty of care, but they'll also consider the duties of workers as well. And it's been true across the country where not only businesses but workers as well have been prosecuted under the safety laws by not meeting those duties that they owe as workers. So I just wanted to quickly kind of, again, just frame it through that lens, just to, remind participants of those duties.
In my experience, both employers and staff in this area are incredibly passionate. There's almost a conflation of their personal identity with the role. So a concept that has helped me work with people in this sector is to remind them that they have a formal role, and they might also be taking up an informal role in the group. So an informal role might be maintaining harmony, or being the driver or organizer, or being the caregiver because they're so passionate about the project. Or some people who declare particular cultural characteristics, or that these are apparent to the group, might also be taking on an additional cultural load for the whole group. So if you're having a formal role, which is what the organisation is providing to you for compensation, hopefully, and then you're taking up this informal role in order to ensure that the task is completed because there's other work that the group needs, might lead to burnout. So just being conscious of the informal role that you're taking up in the group as well. And once you become aware of it, then having some language about how you can share that you're taking up this additional load to the rest of your group, and then handing that informal role back if you don't want to take it up, and then renegotiating role boundaries. So having in mind role, authority, task is always really helpful to me when you're working on creative projects. There's another question. Because of the precarious and sometimes unstable nature of creative work and employment, i.e., it might be gig-based or short-term, and also because there's high competition for roles, some workers think that they need to endure any risky situation so as not to rock the boat and to preserve important relationships with those that might be handing out the next assignment or the next gig. What advice do you have here?
It's a challenging situation because of the kind of precarious nature of the work, the fact that it is often insecure on a casual basis. And of course, as you pointed out, very few people want to rock the boat, so to speak, paint a target on their back, be labeled as a troublemaker, somebody that is difficult and, not easy to work with. How do we overcome this? I think really in terms of our role, I think it's through advice and education. The business owners in the arts sector, they need to recognize that they, again, owe these duties, this primary duty of care, that it's this unshakable legal obligation that they owe, and they have a responsibility to the workers that they engage to participate in their events and to perform. It's okay. Yes, it's a legal responsibility. It's in the safety laws. I've mentioned that repeatedly, but there's also, I think, a moral and ethical obligation as well. But in addition, the other lens through which you can look at it, it makes good business sense as well to take care of your people and to do the right thing. In terms of having systems and processes in place, we've talked about safety today. We've talked about, and there's a variety of different kind of awful terms that are used in this space to describe all this stuff, and it becomes a bit challenging at times. But in essence, what is it all about? It's about preventing harm to workers and to the people that we work with in any industry. And there's a variety of compelling reasons to do that. But some people will be mostly concerned, I think, with the laws and the duties that they owe. Some will be concerned with the moral, ethical stuff. Others, it will be, return on investment, business productivity, efficiency, etc. Well, whichever is your kind of primary motivator, there's a variety of compelling reasons there to do the right thing. In terms of better supporting workers in that scenario or situation, again, what I would suggest to you, if you find yourself in that position where you're being exposed to risks to your health and safety, and it's an environment in which you feel reluctant to speak up, you do not feel sufficiently empowered, your state or territory safety regulator is there to support you, to provide advice and guidance, and possibly, to intervene and to involve, to become involved in the matter should it pose a serious risk to your health and safety. So do bear that in mind. Unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. There is no definitive answer to that question. I do appreciate how challenging that would be for somebody in that situation. So
yeah, thank you so much. I'm also going to bring in now Kate Schaffner, our Director of Creative Workplaces, and go to the Q&A. There's lots of fantastic questions that have come in, so hopefully we'll be able to tackle a few. So Kate, lack of cultural safety in many creative workplaces is a huge driver of psychosocial hazards and harm. Will creative workplaces be supporting any work or guidelines in this space?
Thanks, Tina. The short answer to that is yes, we will. Creative workplaces will be doing work on both psychosocial, physical, and cultural safety, and we'll make those resources available on our Creative Workplaces platform when we launch that next year. And just I might take the moment while I've got the mic to say that there's lots of questions that have come through about resources, and that we will dig up resources and send them out along with the recording to this webinar, so that any sort of checklists, guides, sort of how-to resources that already exist, we'll make sure that we circulate those for the people that need them too. Thanks.
Great. Kate or Jason, we've got a question about historical harm. So how should historical harm be managed in the workplace, i.e. where a worker may have experienced something historically, either in their personal or professional life, and gone to a new workplace and maybe triggered by this?
Look, that's a very difficult thing to manage effectively if somebody has past lived experience of a traumatic event or they've been exposed to harmful behaviors. From an employer's perspective, one thing that you can do, psychometric testing, it's not a silver bullet, but it does help in terms of, the recruitment phase to really just to figure out, is this person an appropriate fit for the requirements of the role? So for example, if somebody has lived experience of, trauma, vicarious trauma, harmful behaviors, and that has had a significant impact on their psychological health, they've been harmed by that, and they bring those experiences with them, obviously, into their next job, their next phase of their career. We need to figure out, essentially, by putting them in this role, is it going to cause them harm? Is it going to do our organization more harm than good? Are they a good fit for the role? Is it suitable, a good role person fit? That's what we're trying to figure out there. So there's ways that can be assessed, but then it becomes quite complicated in terms of disclosure and managing that, and supporting somebody. But I think, look, a lot of those concerns can be eliminated if we give careful consideration to ensuring that somebody is a good fit for the role based upon their past lived experience. Organizations do different things, access to employee assistance programs, mental health first aid training, psychological first aid training, peer support programs are very useful. And looking at the scope of the person's role. It may be that their past lived experience has only started to affect them after they've started within a role. They're actively working within the role and it hasn't become apparent before that. What do you do? Well, there's a range of different ways that you can support the worker in the role to ensure that they aren't harmed any further, and that they're given, any required guidance and support in terms of EAP, peer support, etc. So there's a lot that can be done, but again, there's no silver bullet.
Yeah, it's a really complicated issue. Be really clear about the requirements, transparent about the conditions of work, and continue to support the worker in a way that promotes continuous disclosure from them without opening up them or you to any sort of discriminatory practices. I'm just conscious of the time. I think we might wrap up. So thank you, Jason, for your contribution. Thank you, Kate, as well, and Auslan support. As Kate said, a recording of this session will be made available on our website in the next week or so, as well as additional resources. Please save the date for our next Creative Workplaces webinar, which we held on November the 28th, and will be on the topic of fixed term contracts and how they relate to the arts and culture sector. And as you leave the webinar today, please take a moment to complete the short survey. We always love hearing feedback so we can continually meet your requirements and improve. And thank you again, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Tina and Jason.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.